You waited and you waited. And somewhere in that waiting, you started to wonder if you imagined the whole thing, if the connection was real, if they ever actually felt what you felt. Because silence from an avoidant doesn't just take up space, it dismantles you. It makes you question your own memory, your own worth, your own sanity. And then, without warning, they come back. Or they face you, and everything you rehearsed, every boundary you built, every wall you carefully constructed, starts to shake. Because there is something about standing in front of someone who once meant everything to you, who then disappeared into themselves like you never existed, that breaks open a part of you that you thought had healed. This video is not about them. It is about what happens inside of you. It is about the psychology of that moment, the confrontation, the reunion, the facing, and it is about every single pattern that plays out, every time, without exception. Because this is not random. This is not unique to your situation. This follows a blueprint. And once you understand it, everything changes. The first thing that happens, before a single word is exchanged, is that your nervous system goes to war with itself. You have spent weeks, maybe months, maybe longer, building a version of yourself that could survive their absence. You told yourself you were fine. You convinced yourself that the anger had settled, that the grief had passed, that you no longer needed anything from them. And you believed it, or you almost believed it, right up until the moment they were in front of you again. And then your body betrayed everything. This is not weakness. This is not you being dramatic or foolish or unable to move on. This is the deepest, oldest part of your brain doing exactly what it was built to do. When someone has been a significant attachment figure in your life, when they have occupied space in your nervous system, when your body has learned to regulate even partially around their presence, that does not just disappear because time passed. The body keeps the record. The body remembers. So when they finally face you after that long silence, your heart does something that your mind cannot immediately override. Your chest tightens. Your breathing changes. Something in you simultaneously wants to run toward them and run away from them. That internal split, that war between what your heart still carries and what your mind has spent months trying to convince you of, is one of the most painful psychological experiences a human being can have. And almost no one talks about how physical it is. The silence they gave you was not neutral. Silence from an avoidant is a form of emotional withdrawal that functions almost like a physical removal. When someone you are bonded to pulls away without resolution, without explanation, without closure, your attachment system stays activated. It stays on. It keeps searching the anxiety underneath the surface of your days. The way you would check your phone, the way certain songs would hit differently, the way you would rehearse conversations in your head that you never got to have. All of that was your nervous system refusing to file this person away as safe to release. Because unresolved attachment does not close. It circles. And so when they finally appear, when the silence breaks and they are standing there or speaking to you or making contact, your nervous system does not calmly say, "Oh, closure at last." It surges. It floods. Because the loop it has been running suddenly has new data, and it does not know what to do with it yet. The second thing that happens is that you feel hope before you even consciously register it. This is perhaps the cruelest part of the whole experience, and it deserves to be named honestly. Before your mind catches up, before your defenses activate, before the version of you that built all those boundaries steps forward, hope arrives, quiet, almost invisible, but unmistakable, a flicker, a pull. The part of you that loved them, that still somewhere in the basement of your heart, holds on to the best version of what you had, comes rushing to the surface. You do not want this to happen. Most of the time you are furious that it happens, because you worked so hard, you processed. You journaled, or you talked to friends, or you threw yourself into rebuilding your life, and here you are feeling that pull again, and it feels like a betrayal of all that work. But it is not a betrayal. It is proof that what you felt was real. Hope is not stupidity. Hope in this moment is the heart's automatic response to the presence of something it once knew as home. Even a broken home. Even a home that hurt you. Because the attachment system does not evaluate worthiness before it responds. It responds to familiarity. And they are deeply, profoundly familiar to you. Their voice, their energy, the specific way they occupy a room, these things are wired into you in ways you cannot just decide to delete. What makes this complicated, though, is what happens immediately after the hope flickers. Because the mind, which has been working overtime to protect you, notices it, and it tries to shut it down. You feel the hope, and then you feel afraid of the hope, and then you feel angry at yourself for feeling the hope, and then you feel sad that you have to be angry at yourself for something so human. And all of this happens in the span of seconds. That cascade, that rapid emotional cycling, is one of the defining experiences of facing an avoidant after silence. You are not just dealing with the present moment, you are dealing with every unprocessed layer that the silence deposited inside you. The avoidant in this moment is doing something entirely different. And understanding what is happening on their side is not about making excuses for them. It is about understanding the dynamic, because the dynamic is what has been running the show this entire time. When an avoidant finally faces you, they are almost never doing it casually. Even if they appear casual, even if they seem relaxed or unbothered or almost irritatingly normal, something is happening beneath that surface. Avoidants do not simply drift back into contact or confrontation. There is always a reason. There is always a trigger. Their attachment style was built in response to environments where emotional vulnerability was unsafe, where needing someone, depending on someone, brought pain or rejection or suffocation. And so they learned, in the deepest, most formative years of their development, to shut the valve on emotional need, to become self-sufficient in ways that look like strength but are actually armor, to associate closeness with danger, to equate intimacy with loss of self. When they disappeared into the silence, that was not indifference. This is one of the things that breaks people, the assumption that because they pulled away, they did not care. But avoidants do not pull away because they do not feel. They pull away because they feel too much, and they have no safe internal container for it. The intimacy you built together, the depth, the realness of it, activated their deepest fear, which is being truly known, and then abandoned or suffocated anyway. And so they did what their nervous system has always done. They retreated. But here is what the silence never tells you. They did not stop thinking about you. They did not move through those weeks or months feeling nothing. For many avoidants, the withdrawal period is privately agonizing. They feel the pull toward you, they replay moments. They miss you in ways they cannot bring themselves to act on, because acting on it means vulnerability, and vulnerability is the most dangerous place they know. So they hold it in, they hold all of it, and it builds, and it pressurizes, until something, some internal threshold, some external event, some quiet moment of honesty with themselves, pushes them to finally face you. So when they are standing there, when this confrontation or reunion or contact finally happens, you are carrying months of unprocessed grief and that terrifying flicker of hope, and they are carrying a pressurized vault of unexpressed feeling that they still do not have the tools to fully open. And both of you bring all of that into the same room, into the same silence before the first word, into the same charged, impossible moment. This is why it always feels like more than it should. This is why a simple encounter with them can leave you spinning for days, because it is never just that moment. It is every moment that was swallowed by the silence. It is every conversation that never happened. It is every question that was left unanswered. It is the grief, the hope, the anger, the love, the confusion, all of it compressed and waiting, finally finding an opening. What happens next in the confrontation follows a pattern so consistent it is almost architectural. They will minimize, not necessarily consciously, not necessarily maliciously, but minimization is the avoidant's first defense when emotional weight is coming toward them. They will speak about the time that passed as though it were less significant than it was. They will frame the silence as something that simply happened, rather than something they chose. They may speak about their own experience during that time in ways that seem almost clinical, detached, surface level, carefully stripped of the emotional charge you know must be underneath. And this will make you want to scream, or cry, or both, because you were not living a surface level experience during their silence. You were drowning in it. Every day had texture and weight. Every day, you felt the absence in specific, pointed ways, and to hear them speak about it as though it were nothing, or almost nothing, or something that just sort of occurred, it does something savage to a part of you. It makes you feel like you were the only one who suffered, like you were the only one who cared, like the whole relationship existed only inside you. This is the moment where many people either shut down or explode, and both responses, while entirely understandable, play directly into the avoidant pattern's hands. If you shut down, if the wound they just reopened causes you to go cold, to pull back, to match their emotional distance with your own, something in them actually relaxes. Because distance is where they are comfortable. Distance is their native language. Your withdrawal makes them feel, paradoxically, safer. And from that safety, they can almost function normally. They can be charming, or thoughtful, or even briefly open, which then pulls you back in, which then activates their fear again. The loop completes. If you explode, if the grief and the frustration and the months of unprocessed pain come pouring out, they will go still. Not still like they are listening deeply. Still like an animal that has gone into freeze. Their nervous system will interpret your emotional intensity as exactly the kind of danger they built their entire psychology to escape. And they will shut down. They will become monosyllabic or defensive or physically leave. And you will be left standing there with all that pain still hanging in the air, unmet, and you will feel worse than before you said anything. You will feel like you chased them away again. And the shame of that, the terrible familiar shame of it, will fold in on top of everything else. This is not a coincidence. This is the architecture of the avoidant dynamic. And it is important, it is vital, that you understand this is not about you being too much. This is about a system that was built specifically to make emotional expression feel dangerous and futile. That system predates you. It was constructed long before you came into their life, by experiences that had nothing to do with you. And it will keep running unless they choose, actively, deliberately, with real sustained effort, to dismantle it. The reason this pattern repeats every single time is not because you keep doing something wrong. It is because the pattern is self-reinforcing. Every time it runs successfully, every time they pull away and you absorb the pain alone and they return without full accountability, it teaches both of you something. It teaches them that withdrawal works, that they can disappear and return and the connection will still be there, that the consequences of their avoidance are manageable. And it teaches you, somewhere deep and painful, that love requires you to abandon your own needs. That the only way to keep someone like this is to make yourself smaller, to need less, to feel less, to ask for less. You have been learning that lesson for longer than you realize. And it has cost you things. Now, when the confrontation finally happens, when words actually start to be exchanged, there is a particular emotional phenomenon that tends to occur in the person standing across from the avoidant. And it is one that deserves tremendous compassion because it is profoundly disorienting. You start to take care of them. Even now, even after everything. It happens almost automatically. You notice their discomfort. You sense the walls going up. And something in you, the part that loves them, the part that has always been more attuned to their emotional state than they are, starts to manage the space around them. You soften your words. You pull back from the full weight of what you actually feel. You watch their face for signs of overwhelm and you adjust yourself accordingly. You do it without deciding to do it. You do it because that is what you have always done in this relationship. You have been the emotional regulator for two people, and that role is so deeply grooved into you that you slide right back into it, even in the middle of your own pain. This is perhaps the most heartbreaking part of the whole encounter, because in the moment when you most deserve to be held and heard and seen, in the moment when your pain is at its most visible, and your need is at its most legitimate, you end up once again making room for theirs. You end up once again ensuring that they are comfortable enough to stay in the room. Once again putting the relationship before yourself in a relationship where you have always put the relationship before yourself. And the thing is, it does not even work. They still retreat. They still minimize. They still give you a fraction of what you need. But now you have done it in a way that left you even more depleted because you were managing your own pain at the same time as managing theirs, and there was nothing left over for you. Here is what the silence was really doing to you while it was happening. Because this is important. This is the part that most people skip past in their rush to understand the avoidant. The silence was a kind of slow suffocation. It was not dramatic. It did not arrive with a clear timestamp or an obvious wound. It moved quietly. The first day without contact from them was survivable. The first week was brutal but containable. But somewhere in the middle of the silence, somewhere in the featureless grey of weeks that bled into more weeks, something started to happen to the way you saw yourself. You started to wonder if you were the problem. Not wonder, exactly. The doubt crept in more insidiously than that. It whispered. It worked through questions you could not quite catch in real time. Were you too intense? Did you want too much? Did you push too hard? Was the connection as real as you thought it was? Or were you the only one who felt it so deeply? The silence gave you nothing to work with, no information, no feedback, no reality check. And in that vacuum, your mind did what human minds always do in a vacuum. It filled the space, And because pain seeks explanation, and because self-blame feels more controllable than the alternative, it filled the space with doubt about you. This is one of the most insidious effects of avoidant withdrawal. It does not just take them away from you, it takes you away from you. By the time they finally face you, you may have spent weeks or months in a quiet, grinding negotiation with your own sense of self. Shrinking here, questioning there. Wondering if your needs are too big, your emotions too loud, your love too much. And so, when they finally stand in front of you, you are not just the person they left. You are a person who has been quietly eroded by their absence. And you might not even know how much has been worn away until you are in that moment, trying to find the words and realizing that some of the confidence you used to carry has quietly gone missing. The confrontation, when it deepens, often arrives at a specific and recognizable inflection point. There will be a moment, usually after the initial surface level exchange, after the minimizing and the careful navigation, where something real breaks through, where the armor slips just slightly, where you say something, or your eyes do something, or the silence between sentences carries too much weight. And for a moment, a genuine moment, you see them. The real them, not the defended, retreated, armored version. The person underneath all of that. The person you fell for. The person who made you feel, at certain perfect moments, like you had finally found somewhere safe to land. And they will see you, equally and at the same time, and something will pass between you that neither of you has words for. It is one of the most electrically painful experiences that human beings can have, that instant of mutual recognition between two people who have hurt and been hurt and still, despite all of it, carry something unresolved and alive between them. This moment will undo a significant amount of the emotional distance you built, not because you are weak, not because you do not know better, but because what you feel, what you have always felt, is real. And reality does not respect the walls you built to survive it. This is the moment where many people make decisions they later have to reckon with. Because in that charged, open, mutually visible second, the pull is so strong that it can override months of clear-headed processing. The body says yes before the mind can say wait. And that yes, even if it leads nowhere lasting, even if the avoidant retreats again the following day, feels like relief, feels briefly like home. And then the retreat comes. Again, because here is the thing about avoidance that makes the aftermath of these confrontations so particularly devastating. They can access genuine feeling in a peak moment and then pull away from it when the moment passes. This is not manipulation. This is not a performance. The feeling was real. The connection was real. But their capacity to sustain emotional openness over time, to let that feeling live and breathe and be built upon, is severely limited by the architecture of their attachment style. So they open, briefly. They give you a glimpse of something true, and then the fear arrives. Because vulnerability always triggers the fear, and the walls go back up, sometimes within hours. And you are left with the memory of that moment of realness, and the weight of the retreat that followed it, and a pain that is somehow more acute than before the confrontation happened. Because now, you cannot even comfort yourself with the idea that they do not care. Now you know they do. Now you have seen it in their face, and heard it in the catch of their voice, and felt it in the weight of that mutual moment. And they still left. They still retreated. They still chose the safety of distance over the risk of staying open. And that is a particular kind of loss that is almost impossible to explain to people who have not felt it. Because you are grieving someone who is not gone. Someone who cares but cannot stay. Someone who is reachable in flashes, but not in the sustained, nourishing way that you need. You are loving a lighthouse that turns, that illuminates you briefly and then sweeps away. And telling yourself that the brief illumination is enough. But it is not enough, and some part of you has always known it is not enough. There is a specific psychological phenomenon that tends to anchor people in these dynamics long past the point where they have intellectually understood that they need to leave. It is called intermittent reinforcement, and it is the reason the brief moments of openness are more powerful than consistent warmth would ever be. When connection and withdrawal alternate unpredictably, when you cannot know whether today will bring closeness or distance, warmth or cold silence, your brain's reward circuitry goes into overdrive. It is the same mechanism that makes unpredictable things addictive. When you know something will always be there, the brain normalizes it. But when something appears and disappears, when you cannot predict when it will come, the longing for it becomes almost obsessive. The moments of connection become disproportionately precious, because they are rare, and the retreats become disproportionately painful for the same reason. This is why the confrontation can feel more destabilizing than the silence. The silence, as terrible as it was, had a certain terrible consistency. But the confrontation broke that consistency. It handed you connection and hope and that devastating glimpse of realness. And then it took it back. And the taking back, after the brief restoration, is neurologically experienced as loss all over again. The grief restarts, the loop re-engages, and you find yourself back at the beginning of a process you thought you had survived. You are not weak for feeling this. You are human, and you have been caught in one of the oldest and most powerful psychological traps that relationships can create. Now, there is something else that happens in the aftermath of the confrontation. Once the dust settles and you are alone again with what occurred, something quieter and more internal. You will begin to reconstruct the encounter. You will replay it, all of it. The look on their face when they first saw you, the specific words they chose, and the words they conspicuously avoided. The moment their eyes did that thing, what they said about the silence and what they did not say. The charged moment of mutual recognition and what it meant and whether it meant what you think it meant. You will run it forward and backward. You will pause on certain seconds. You will hold certain words up to the light and examine them for meaning. This is not compulsive. This is not you being unable to let go. This is a mind doing exactly what minds do with unresolved attachment. It continues to process. It continues to search for the information it was denied during the silence. It is trying still to answer the question that the avoidant has never fully answered, which is, what am I to you? What were we? Was any of it real? Why was your capacity for distance greater than your capacity to stay? And the brutal truth is that the confrontation, as significant as it felt, may not have actually answered any of those questions, because avoidants do not typically provide clean answers in these moments. They offer fragments. They offer the charge of the moment and the slight softening in the things they say between the lines. But the direct, honest, emotionally complete accounting of what happened and why, that is almost never available in a single confrontation. And so your mind keeps working, keeps searching, keeps returning to the encounter the way a tongue keeps returning to a sore tooth. Something important needs to be said about what you deserve in all of this, because the entire arc of an avoidant dynamic tends to position you as the one who is asking for too much, as the one whose needs are the source of tension, as the one whose emotional presence and honest hunger for real connection is somehow the destabilizing force in the relationship. This is a lie, and it is a lie that is so thoroughly embedded in the pattern that you have probably started to believe it. Wanting to know where you stand with someone is not needy. Wanting the person you love to be present with you, honest with you, consistent with you. These are not excessive demands. These are the minimum conditions for a functioning bond between two human beings. The fact that those basic conditions were too much for them to maintain says everything about their limitations and nothing about your excess. You have been swimming upstream in this dynamic. You have been doing the emotional labor of two people and receiving a fraction of what a single person requires. You have bent and stretched and adjusted yourself into shapes that hurt you, trying to make yourself compatible with someone whose attachment system runs fundamentally toward isolation. And you did all of this because you love them. Because the connection, when it was present, was genuinely extraordinary. Because you saw something in them, something real, something worth staying for. And that love is not a mistake. That love is not evidence of bad judgment. Love is not wrong just because it lands in a complicated place. But love also cannot do all the work. And at some point, and maybe that point is now, maybe it was before the confrontation, and this confrontation has made it clearer, you have to look honestly at what is being asked of you and what you are receiving in return. Because a love that consistently requires you to be smaller, to need less, to absorb silence as though it is something you deserved, that love is feeding one person and starving the other. And the one being starved is you. After the confrontation, there is often a period of strange, suspended ambiguity. They are no longer absent in the absolute way they were during the silence. There has been contact now, words have been exchanged, something happened, but nothing is resolved. Nothing is defined. The relationship status, which was already unclear, which has perhaps always been a site of anxiety for you, is still unclear. And you are left in a new kind of limbo that is somehow even harder to navigate than the silence was. Because at least during the silence you knew what you were dealing with. You could grieve. You could at least in theory begin to let go. But now there is something in the air between you, something that was reactivated by the confrontation, and it makes letting go feel premature, and it makes holding on feel foolish. And you are suspended between the two, and it is exhausting in a specific bone-deep way that is very hard to put into words. This is a part of the avoidant dynamic that rarely gets discussed, the extended aftermath. The way these confrontations do not provide endings so much as they provide new beginnings of old uncertainty. The way you can have a significant, charged, emotionally real encounter with someone and walk away from it knowing less about where you stand than you did before it happened. The way hope and hurt get so thoroughly braided together in these dynamics that you cannot separate them anymore. The question that lives underneath all of this, the one that does not get asked out loud but that drives everything, is whether they can change, whether they can grow, whether the glimpses of openness are a preview of something that could sustain, or whether they are the best it will ever be, brief, charged, and ultimately retreating. The honest answer is, it depends entirely on them, on their awareness, on their willingness, on whether they are ready to sit with the discomfort of their own patterns rather than retreating from them. An avoidant who understands their attachment style, who has genuinely done the work of looking at their withdrawal behaviors and their fear of intimacy and their tendency to equate closeness with danger, can change. People do change. Attachment styles are not destiny. They are deeply grooved, powerfully conditioned patterns, but they are not immutable. But that change cannot be willed into existence by you. It cannot be loved into them by someone patient enough and understanding enough and willing enough to absorb the pain of their distance. That is not how it works. The change, if it is coming, has to come from a place inside them that only they can reach, from a decision that only they can make. And no amount of your love, your presence, your understanding of their psychology, your compassion for their wounds, none of it can substitute for the moment when they decide that the safety of their walls is costing them something they are no longer willing to lose. You cannot be the reason they change. And trying to be, positioning yourself as the one whose love is transformative enough to break through their defenses, is a role that will take everything from you and may produce nothing. Here is what you are actually allowed to do. Here is what the confrontation cannot take from you unless you let it. You are allowed to know what you need, not what you can settle for. Not what feels realistic given their limitations. What you actually need, in the clearest and most honest terms, from a relationship. You are allowed to hold that knowledge without immediately apologizing for it or qualifying it into something more palatable. You need consistency. You need presence. You need someone who can stay through the hard moments rather than disappearing into them. You need someone whose love is a daily experience and not an occasional event. Those are not outsized demands. Those are the building blocks of a livable love. You are allowed to feel everything that the confrontation brought up without letting it rewrite the story you have been building since the silence began. The hope that flared is real. The pull toward them is real. The love that lives somewhere in you, probably still, is real. And none of that means you have to re-enter something that has already shown you clearly how it ends. You can hold the love and still choose yourself. Those two things can coexist. You are allowed to grieve this without a clean ending, because clean endings are rare in real emotional life, and especially rare in the wake of avoidant dynamics. The confrontation may never give you the full accounting you deserve. They may never say the thing that would finally allow the wound to close. And waiting for that moment, building your recovery around the hope that they will one day give you perfect clarity and full accountability, is a way of staying tethered to something that may never deliver what you are waiting for. The closure you need is going to have to come from you. That is an unfair truth. It is also the only one that puts the power back where it belongs, in your hands, in your life, in your story. There is something else worth naming about what this dynamic has done to you over time. Because the effects of loving an avoidant, of living inside the push-pull, the silence, the brief openings, the retreats, do not stay in the relationship. They travel with you. They shape the way you show up in other areas of your life. You may have become hypervigilant, attuned in an exhausting way to the moods of the people around you, watching for signs of withdrawal, bracing for sudden distance, reading rooms and people and silences with an intensity that tires you out before the day has even started, because when the most important emotional environment in your life was unpredictable, you learned to track it obsessively. That skill, that constant surveillance of the emotional atmosphere, was a form of protection, but outside of that relationship, it is a form of suffering. You may have developed a habit of making yourself smaller than you are, of preemptively apologizing for your needs, of checking before you express something whether it will be too much for the person you are with. This is the long shadow of a dynamic where your full emotional presence was repeatedly experienced as threatening. You learned to edit yourself into a version that felt more acceptable. And somewhere in that editing process, you may have lost access to parts of yourself that you need back. These things are survivable. These patterns can be unlearned. But unlearning them requires first seeing them clearly. And seeing them clearly requires stepping back far enough from the dynamic and from the confrontation and everything it stirred up, to look at the whole shape of what this has been and what it has asked of you. When they faced you, when that long silence finally broke, and you stood across from them with everything between you unresolved and alive, something happened that was bigger than just the two of you. Something inside you was asked to make a choice, even if no one announced it as a choice. A choice about what you are willing to accept as the architecture of your emotional life. A choice about whether the intermittent warmth is enough. About whether the glimpse of the real then, in those brief open moments, is sufficient nourishment for a heart that needs to be fed consistently. The confrontation does not resolve things. That is its most important truth. It does not tie up the story. It does not provide the healing scene that you may have imagined during all those months of silence. It rips something open and hands you the opening, and then it is up to you what you do next. Some people use the opening to walk back in. Some people use it to walk away. Some people stand in it for longer than they want to, suspended between the two, not yet ready for either. All of those responses are human. All of them are survivable. But if you are standing in that opening right now, if you are in the days or weeks after the confrontation, trying to figure out what it meant and where to go from here, then let this be a thing you hold on to. Your awareness of this pattern, your ability to see it for what it is, your understanding of the dynamic and what it has asked of you, that is not a small thing. Most people live inside these patterns for years without ever having language for them. You have language now, and language is the beginning of choice, and choice is the beginning of freedom. You came into this relationship with a full, open, courageous heart. You gave it things that were not required of you: patience, understanding, compassion, the willingness to absorb pain that was never yours to carry. You showed up over and over in the face of withdrawal and silence, and those terrible gaps where a person who said they loved you went entirely quiet. That is not a small thing. That is not weakness or naivety or desperation. That is enormous love, offered by someone who knew how to be emotionally present in ways that the person they loved could not yet match. The silence said nothing about your worth. The retreat said nothing about your value. The avoidant's inability to stay was not a verdict on whether you were worth staying for. It was a report on their limitations. And it is long past time for you to separate what belongs to them from what you have been carrying as though it belongs to you. The confrontation happened. You survived it. You felt what you felt and you stayed on your feet. And now you get to decide what the next chapter says. Not them, not the pattern, not the next silence or the next return. You.